Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session of our Web3 real estate investing course. I'm a little nervous because I'm using a new video setup that I haven't used before, so I'm knocking on wood right now and hoping that things go okay. What I'm going to do is introduce you to Web3 real estate investing, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Tell you a little bit more about myself, like why am I even qualified to be talking about this, and tell you a little bit about REI DAO, which is where this event is being hosted. And why don't we just jump right into it? So let's see, here we go. I'm going to be trying this newfangled video system. And, well, I'm already having trouble. One second. Here we go. All right. So now you should be seeing the PowerPoint. Great. So this week, as I said, it's the promise of Web3 and the reality. So there's a lot of promise there. There's a lot of promises that were made about Web3. And as you might guess, they don't always live up to it. The reality doesn't always match the promise. Nonetheless, if I didn't believe in this technology, then I wouldn't be doing this course, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I believe in it. But first, I want to, just sort of walk you through, like, what exactly are we talking about when we talk about Web3, and why should you care about it? So one thing you'll want to know is just real quick, a commercial for REI DAO. So in the second week, we're going to explain what a DAO is exactly. But the reason we created REI DAO simply is so that a group of people could come together and quickly find, close, and manage deals, and do so using all that crypto has to offer. So that means putting the deals on the blockchain. I'll explain what that means, real estate on the blockchain downstream. But this has been a passion of mine. I've been working on this idea for several years now. I first had this idea back in 2017, put it on the shelf because the technology wasn't mature enough, but it really started catching fire end of last year. And really this year is when DAOs really started to take off. And so that's why I created REI DAO. The main thing I want you to understand for the moment is it's not some kind of an exclusive coaching program. It's not some weird NFTs in the metaverse thing. It's not super buzzwordy. It's really straightforward. We get together and we buy properties together, and we manage those properties on the blockchain in a way that allows us to scale the organization much more massively than would have been possible using sort of previous structures, organizational structures, and technology. So a quick reminder that all of this you can find online in the resources section of the course. So right now you're watching on YouTube, but we will have an archive of all these things in reidao.community. If you go there and go to the course and click on the resources tab, you'll be able to watch a recording of this. We also are recording this as a podcast. Hello, if you're listening to the podcast. So we want this to be as easily accessible as possible. Not everyone can make a Tuesday night at 8 p.m. to watch something on their computer. But most of what I'm talking about, while there are some visuals that I'll be showing you, a lot of it is stuff that even if you're just hearing it and not watching, you can understand it. So on to the next slide. So a little bit about me, my background. My LinkedIn is there. If you go to linkedin.com/nin/DJ Scruggs, you can find me and friend me, or connect with me, as they call it in the business speak. And my background is tech and real estate. So I spent about 20 plus years doing tech companies. I started my first software company in 1995. For those of you in the tech world who know what Java is, that was my basic business plan. Back then, Java was not even out of beta. And my whole business was Java is going to be cool. I want to build a company on Java. So I say that not to brag, but just to say that I've been at this for a while, right? I mean, that's when the internet was really just in its infancy. And I've been watching technology since about 1992, really. And I first got online in 1994. I had my eureka moment in 1995, and that's when I started my first software company. And I did several variations. I went through the highs and lows, the dot-com bubble of Web 2.0, had some successes, but also had some failures. And one thing that I learned about tech is there's a lot of luck involved. You can have the greatest idea in the world, but you could be doing it at the wrong time, right? There was a video on the internet before YouTube, but we don't remember those companies anymore because they did it too soon. There was also a video on the internet after YouTube, but they're all an afterthought because YouTube was there at the right time in the right place. So tech is, you can be very smart. You can have a lot of things right, but you can also have just one thing wrong and it wrecks the whole enterprise. So I got a little burned out on that cycle. And a few years ago, I switched to real estate. Real estate has its own challenges. I'm not going to pretend that it's easy peasy, but it's a lot more predictable. There's a lot more that you control compared to technology. It's a little less luck. Although there's a lot of us right now who are realizing how lucky we were to have Fed rates in the sub 2% for the last 10 years. So I guess you could call that luck, but it's a different kind of luck than with tech. Anyway, I would invite you to come find me on LinkedIn. I've posted a picture of my LinkedIn profile here, and I'll put links to this all in the resources section. And then just another quick commercial is if you go to realweb3.substack.com, this is where I write about these concepts. The Web3, real Web3 means like real stuff on Web3, not fake stuff, not weird tokens in the metaverse thing, but real property using Web3 technologies. I would love it if you came and subscribed because I post pretty regularly some of my thoughts on this. And a lot of what I'm presenting to you today is based on what I've been writing there. Oops, I just clicked a link. Let me do this again. Okay, so what is Web3? So one of the I think this might be some of the worst branding of all time, calling it Web3. But let me give you sort of the canonical chart that they often show that explains what Web3 is. So basically, the period they now call Web 1, kind of the prehistory, I shouldn't say the prehistory, but the early history, the prototypical history of the internet. Web 1 is from the 1990s up to about 2000. I personally put it at 1998, which is when AOL purchased Netscape. Netscape was the first sort of commercialized web browser that got real traction. And that period was basically about creating web pages, right, with some capabilities built in. So if you were just a normal company, you might have a brochure on the web. If you're really ambitious, you're someone like Amazon, you're actually selling things on the web. There was a lot of companies during that period who popped up who were setting out to be the Amazon of X, right? There was a company called CD Now, which they sold CDs on the internet, and they were the Amazon of CDs until Amazon came along and said, no, we're going to be the Amazon of CDs. And we saw that happen over and over. There was a lot of e-commerce companies that popped up during that period that are really just little footnotes in history now. Nonetheless, a lot of great things came out of that period. That's where Yahoo came from. That's where Google was born. They didn't really kind of find their legs until a few years later, but that's when they started, was during that period. So that's Web 1.0. You could basically go look at web pages, but you couldn't really interact unless you were buying something. Web 2.0 is the early 2000s. I connected to the blogging area. If you remember blogs, those were, that started with blogger.com, which was a website that was started by a guy named Evan Williams, who that name may ring a bell, but if it doesn't, he was one of the founders of Twitter. So Blogger came along, and that was one of the first times that just any old person could just go create an account and publish something on the web, and they could allow other people to come comment on it. That really found its legs in I would say the post 9/11 era. There was a lot of prominent bloggers who really, as you can imagine, 9/11 was a catastrophic event in world history, and it provoked a lot of conversation around politics and what is the role of the internet in culture, and so that's the Web 2 era, and it really kind of found its legs. It started with blogging, but then Twitter came along and Facebook around the same time, and the idea there was it was more interactive. So it wasn't just let me look at this web page, but it was let me post my own content, let me interact with my readers, and so we started developing relationships online. LinkedIn popped up in this period as well. And so the thing that happened, for better or worse, is that we developed these massive corporations. Facebook is probably the most well-known example, that they just vacuumed up all the data. They created the social graph. That's the connections we have with people all over the world. It starts with our friends. The joke, or the way they used to describe Facebook compared to Twitter was, Facebook is the people you used to know, and Twitter is the people you want to know, right? So you had this kind of celebrity culture emerge online. Of course, YouTube and others came along at that time too. And you had the idea of almost like a citizen celebrity, someone who didn't have to be on TV. They didn't have to have a stand-up comedy act. They just started posting videos, and the very idea of an influencer emerges before that, right? So back before, let's say 2009, no one even talked about influencers. That was just like, if you used that phrase in the 1990s, no one would really know what you meant. It'd be a hyper niche specific way of thinking. So that's Web 2, and a lot of really great things happen, but a lot of really terrible things happen. I won't rehash all of them, but the biggest complaint I would say is that people feel like these companies built literally trillions of dollars in value on the backs of the users, right? So Facebook's value, the joke is that if you are not being, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. And so that's that's kind of what it is with Facebook. They monetized, they aggregated all this incredible attention, all these literally billions of people logging in, and turned that into money, lots of money, hundreds of billions of dollars in value. But the people who actually use these platforms don't really make any money at all. Or in the best case, maybe they become a big YouTube star. More commonly, they make no money, or maybe they're on Spotify and they make a little bit of money. They make 1 penny every time their song is streamed. So Web3, which is a more recent phenomenon and is still more of an idea than a reality, the idea is that instead of handing over, aggregating all this data into the hands of these powerful corporations, whether it's Google or Facebook or Twitter, YouTube, instead of handing over your power, you take that back and you control what your data is used for and how that data is monetized. So that's the basic idea. Now, unfortunately, one of the challenges with Web3 is that it's not really like the web. I mean, what's really happening is under the covers, it's really more about data. Like, I wish they'd called it something like Data 2 or maybe Data 3 instead of Web 3, because people, when they think of the web, they think of this thing they interact with. But what's really happening with Web 3 technologies is less about what you're seeing and more about what's happening under the covers. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of this technology. So one is that it's decentralized. And I'll show you what that means in a little bit. But basically, instead of all of my data living, or not all, but a huge chunk of my data being on Facebook, and also a huge chunk of my data being on YouTube, and also a huge chunk of my data being on Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat or any number of social sites, the idea is that no, that data is not centralized, it's decentralized. I control my data. It's trustless. So unlike with the internet, where we have to trust the places, right? When I give data to Facebook or LinkedIn or some other site like that, there's a certain level of trust I have to have in them, which most of the time is fine. It's not that big a deal to tell either of those websites where it is that I worked from 2007 to 2009. But it can be very scary if you're giving up things like financial information, as we've seen from these massive hacks that have happened over the years. And some of them aren't even websites. They're service providers like Experian. They lost, 70 million user accounts or not even user accounts, surveillance accounts, credit reports, that kind of thing. So the idea is with Web3 is we don't want to have to trust anything. We want to build the trust into the architecture of it ourselves. Fractional ownership. So again, because of cryptocurrency, the idea with cryptocurrency is that transaction costs go to zero or close to zero. Now, that's the theory. It hasn't always been the practice. But the idea being I should be able to, just like in real life, if I want to give you 25 cents, I can reach in my pocket, pull out a quarter and give it to you. I should be able to do that on the internet, right? I should be able to send you a quarter, whether you're 10 miles away or 100 miles away or literally on the other side of the globe. It should be as simple and as costless as handing you a quarter. But because of the way our systems are architected, that's not really the case. There's going to be a transaction fee ranging anywhere from 15 cents up to a few dollars for me to be able just to send you a quarter. And so fractional ownership, the idea is that because if we drive these costs down to zero or close to zero, then we can own little pieces of things, right? And I'll show you some examples of what I mean by fractional ownership in a little bit. But that's the idea, is if you have a decentralized, trustless, low-cost network, that allows fractional ownership of all kinds of assets. So it's programmable. This is the big difference between just using a credit card and using cryptocurrencies. So credit cards aren't really programmable. They seem electronic. They look electronic. You know, when I was just at the gas station and I bought, you know, a candy bar, and it seemed pretty simple. I held up a little card there and it beeped and I paid for it. I paid $5 and bang, that money went out of my bank account and to that little gas station, and I got my candy bar. That looks programmable, but it's really not. That's just really a gigantic facade that the financial industry has built on top of these legacy systems. So if I wanted to write a new type of program, me as a programmer, I really can't. You know, I'm locked out unless maybe I work for one of the big financial banks. There's really no way to program money to do things. And it's self-sovereign. This kind of goes along the same lines as decentralized and trustless. And it's one of those phrases that's kind of hard to grok. Self-sovereign, what does that mean? But I'll show you an example of what I mean by self-sovereign. So let's just jump into through some of these. So let's talk about decentralization. What I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to play a video, if I can get it queued up here. I was going to like take this video and try to turn it into some PowerPoint, but you know, it was a good video that I found on YouTube. It's only 2 minutes, so I'm just going to play this right now so that you can see what I'm talking about.
Traditional finance and decentralized finance. What you need to know. What is traditional finance? It's what we're used to, like banks and other financial institutions that act like the middleman. There's you, the middleman like your bank, some form of payment channel like Visa or MasterCard, the recipient's bank, and the recipient. Now, what's decentralized finance? It essentially accomplishes the same purpose as traditional finance, but without the financial institution. There's you and the recipient. No middleman, and a transaction is done on the blockchain. What is a blockchain? A blockchain is an immutable timestamp series record of data that is distributed and managed by a cluster of computers. There are many aspects of the blockchain we can dive into, but we'll save that for another video. So what is the difference between traditional finance and decentralized finance? Let's look at the trust source. The trust source for decentralized finance is public blockchains. Records are kept simultaneously across thousands of computers where all transactions are publicly auditable. There is no core authority. Every participant in the network can access the history of transactions. While traditional finance trust source is public governance framework composed of laws, licensed financial institutions, and financial authorities. There is a core authority which only privileged users or institutions can access. Another difference are barriers. Decentralized finance is a more open system, meaning it's more transparent and doesn't have many barriers, which allows for innovation and ease of entry. Unlike traditional finance, which is heavily regulated. We are still in the early days for the use of digital ledger technologies. This concept of decentralized finance shows mass potential and has what it takes to revolutionize the financial sector.
Okay, so that was just a quick video sort of describing what I mean by decentralization. So, you know, that gives you the idea. Instead of going through banks, which have all kinds of gatekeepers around them, a combination of laws and bureaucracy and systems that make it where in order to get a credit card, you have to jump through lots of hoops. In order to even open a bank account, you have to jump through lots of hoops. Decentralized just eliminates that all together, and you basically just have a wallet on the blockchain. And that allows it to be trustless. So let's give some examples of what it means to be trustless. So this is really just, these pictures I have are just another variation on what we just showed you. So again, when I gave that example of going to the gas station and buying a candy bar, it felt like I was taking some money in this card and giving it to the people in the gas station. What was actually happening is I was telling my bank to communicate with their bank and give them money, and they were following a whole suite of rules that governed that. And by rules, I mean laws, and I mean they have giant departments for compliance. And so, for me, it's easy peasy, right? I've had a bank account for decades, so it's not that big a deal. But for some people, it's hard to get bank accounts, especially if you're in a developing world. And on the flip side, on the seller side, for you to have a merchant account to receive money is hard too. Now, services like PayPal and Venmo have popped up to make it easier, but it's still ultimately, it's a trustful system. You have to rely on banks and participate in the financial network in order for them to work. So trustless, again, to reiterate, this is sort of what the video talked about, which is that there is no bank, there is no middleman or middlewoman. I just send them money using the blockchain, and you have some tools to guarantee that, first of all, you are who you say you are, and that you're not sending the same amount of money to multiple people and lying or faking it. You're guaranteeing that this amount of money is coming from me to you, and that's what the blockchain enables. That's really fundamentally what made Bitcoin such a new innovation. So fractional ownership. So this is one of those things that is fascinating. And in our case, we're talking mostly about real estate because obviously this course is about Web3 real estate. And it's one of those things that's been promised, and there's some movement on it, but people have been talking about it for years, and it's only still really just kind of starting to get moving. But I'll give you some examples. So these are, this is Square Foot Coin. They are based out in Florida. The idea there is you can just buy an NFT or a piece of an NFT that is linked to a property. And by owning that NFT, you essentially own a piece of the property. There's some challenges with actually doing that legally. I've spoken with them, and even though it's all in English what you see there, and they've got that nice little U.S. flag up there in the upper right corner, most of what they're doing is actually happening in South America and in Brazil primarily, because there's some barriers to doing this in the U.S. That doesn't mean they can't do it in the U.S., but it's just it's kind of hard. It's not as simple as what I showed you in that little diagram of, oh, I will just use my little blockchain wallet and send some money and own some property. A lot more complicated than that. Nonetheless, the concept is there, the technology is there, and some people are starting to execute on it. I've got a couple more I'll show you just to give you examples. Oops, let's do this. Let me go down here. Realty. So again, realty.com, they've been at this for a few years, and they make it look really simple, right? Fractional and frictionless real estate investing. Let me just hop in there and go buy a piece of real estate. The thing is, when you click that Get Started button, what happens is it goes into, they're required to be an accredited investor. So even though this is in English, their primary market is French. The founder is French. They do a lot of business up in Canada. They're really more about allowing French Canadians primarily, to buy in the U.S. So it looks fractional and frictionless, but it's not really. And for that reason, they have grown. They have been able to buy properties, but it's been a very slow process. And I give them a lot of credit for getting the ball rolling, but it's still very early days. Now this one is Lofty. Lofty's a more recent example, Lofty.ai, and I'll come back to them in a minute. But what I want to focus on down there in that lower, where that red and circle, what I think is kind of neat is what they say is they give it's a little card that sort of indicates what the property is, But what they're really saying is, you're buying tokens. So you can buy, in this case, 8,712 tokens at $50 each. And that's what you're buying. You really are buying blockchain tokens the way that they've set this up. They do not require you to be an accredited investor. They have organized this legally in a way that's a workaround to that. I'm not 100% convinced it's a legal workaround. I will talk about them in the week 3 when we go through some examples of the applications of this. Nonetheless, a lot of credit. They've sold over 100 properties this way. I've bought using their system. I think it's really fascinating. It's got a lot of potential to it. So again, it's very early days, but it's nice to see someone who's got real traction. They have a real community of people that are buying properties and manage them on the chain today. So that's great news. Now, programmable. This is one of those things that's hard to, I talked a little bit about programming money. It's hard to show. It's more of a tell kind of thing. So what I'm going to do is sort of show you a compare and contrast. So this picture, this is just something I got from the state of California's website for how to foreclose on a property. You can see it's a flow chart. Foreclosing on a property is 100. There's no Web3. There's barely any Web2 about it. It's really pre-web. It's all taking documents and filing them with courts and going through just a mountain of paperwork and following some procedures to foreclose on a property, which is fine. I mean, it's something that happens every day, but it's really hard to automate or bring cryptocurrency to bear in this kind of system. It's the old legacy financial system, which is based on law and not on code. And so it's possible to, I don't ever imagine that foreclosure will be put on the blockchain, but there's certain types of transactions that you can imagine will be put on the blockchain, whether it's automatic rent collection, automatic refunds based on good behavior, any number of things you could do that would be programmable. But this is just to give you an idea of the legacy system, which is really about the courts and lots of lawyers. Now this is an example of a programmable stablecoin. This is a flow chart, but stablecoin, by the way, is a coin that is linked to the dollar and matches the dollar, right? So if you follow crypto, you may know Bitcoin and Ethereum, their prices fluctuate wildly all over the place. I think Bitcoin got as high as $60,000. Right now, it's been around $20,000. Ethereum has had similar kind of volatility. Not the best choice of currency to use if you just want to buy and sell stuff, right? So a stable coin is a system that sort of balances out so that when you buy this coin, you basically trade Ether or other types of assets, and they will give you USDC. Is it USDC or I think it's just USD is the name of the DAI. It's a type of token that is linked to the dollar, so that when you send me one DAI, I know that you're sending me the equivalent of $1. And they do this through a pretty elaborate series of programmed smart contracts. The way it works is if I want to get some DAI, let's say I want to get $50 worth of DAI, I have to give them $100 worth of Ethereum, at least 100. And so I send them $100 worth of Ethereum. They lock that up in a contract. They send me back $50 worth of DAI. I can do with it what I want. And then at some point, I can repay that. I can send them that $50 back, and I'll get my $100 worth of Ethereum. But in the meantime, if the price of Ethereum goes down, right, then they can liquidate part of it. They can basically automatically sell off some of that Ethereum. That's a way for them to collateralize. It's over collateralized this stable coin, and allows them to sort of programmatically, automatically have a stabilized system for allowing people to transact in dollars, even on top of an incredibly volatile currency. It's really amazing when you think about what they've managed to do there. They've had their periods of stress and strain, but they've held up. They've been doing it for several years now, and even through crazy bear markets and crazy bull markets, DAI has been very solid. And DAI, by the way, or MakerDAI is part of MakerDAO, which I'll talk more next week about what a DAO, how exactly a DAO works. But they are proof that you can build a pretty amazing financial system through a self-organized group of committed practitioners, and use smart contracts to move literally tens of billions of dollars around using the blockchain. Amazing what they've done there in a few years. So self-sovereign, this is one of those words. Sovereign is one of those things you might have heard of the sovereign citizen movement. It's not like that. It's one of those phrases. It just kind of feels weird to hear people talk about it. But this gets back to what, in a sense, it replaces the bank in this scenario I gave about where because my bank knows who I am and the merchant, their bank knows who they are, and the banks all participate in a legal infrastructure that allows them to work together. You could say that there's no sovereignty. It's basically just, it's inside the sovereignty of the jurisdiction, right? So there's the U.S. So even though I'm in, let's say, South America, I can use my Visa down there to buy something in Colombia. The sovereign there is Colombia and the U.S., and the banks exist within those jurisdictions, and they agree to play by rules, international rules around how money moves around. Crypto is basically about self-sovereignty, where we don't need a superstructure. We don't need a nation state to validate our existence. That's a little bit more kind of theory than practice, but it's an interesting concept. So what this looks like is what we have now are these little, on the web, are kind of these separate little sovereign nations, digital nations that exist, right? So we've all seen this. If you're logging into a website, it might ask you to sign in with Google, or sign in with Twitter, or sign in with Facebook, sign in with LinkedIn. Lately, I've seen sign in with Apple. That's cool. I don't have to create a new username and password. That's great, because that's a real pain, and that's a security risk, right? Trying to remember passwords. People tend to use the same password over and over, so it's a good idea to use these credential providers. But the thing you got to remember is these are all really just separate databases, right? So when I'm signing in with Google, what's happening is I'm going to the Google site and saying, yes, I want to be able to access this website. And so it's being written into the Google database. So anything I do in that context, Google knows about it, and the site I'm with knows about it, but the others don't know about it. And when you're seeing this, what you really should imagine is just a bunch of separate databases. That's what's happening. Now, the way in the Web3 context, the way it works is there is no, that distributed ledger line you see there on this chart that is the database. And when I say the database, it's not like a database inside of Google or inside of Facebook or inside of Twitter. It's spread across tens of thousands of computers and encrypted. So that's the distributed ledger. That's why I say that I think Web3 would be better off calling itself Data 3. And my information, I control who can access that and what amount of that data they can access using keys. And so I can use that to set up a wallet on a chain, and then I can use that wallet to sign, to receive tokens, to receive NFTs, to buy tokens, to sign a transaction, to tell a website, yes, I am who I say I am, without having to involve Google or Facebook or Twitter or any of the others. And so what that ends up looking like, this is where we're headed. We're not here yet, but it ends up looking like you'll be able to have third parties validate you, right? So your driver's license, your passport, maybe you have a student ID. Those are third parties. Those are issuers. They're the ones who say, yes, you do have the right to drive a car in this state, but it will be stored in credentials that I control and that I can choose who gets to access them. That's the direction we're headed with this. And just to show you what I mean, a good place to look for inspiration is Estonia. Tiny little Estonia is an extremely advanced country when it comes to electronic services. And they've been moving, for really the last 15 years, been moving everything to electronic. They have something called e-citizen. You can become basically a citizen of Estonia for, I think, $300 just by going to their website and filling out some forms and validating who you are. So they didn't start out using blockchain, and they don't use the blockchain for everything, but they've been moving more and more of their stuff onto chain. And from what I'm told, I've never been to Estonia, but I'm told that if you're a citizen, it's just miraculous. You can go into any establishment, pull out your phone, and use that to sign things electronically. And if their healthcare system is such that I can go to any doctor and use that, and it'll retrieve information of my health record, but it's encrypted. It means I don't have to fill out another health history for whatever doctor I'm seeing. It's really amazing, like what's possible with the technology, and it's really cool that a tiny little country like Estonia, which I think is less than 2 million people, is doing this. But not far behind, we're working on it, right? So California, this is just from a couple weeks ago. So California is going to allow records to be issued on chain. So a good way to think about this, I think, is an example. They're talking about birth certificates and things like that. That's a pretty obvious example. Like, it would be nice if I could just not have to take a copy of my birth certificate somewhere to prove I'm who I say I am. It'd be great if I could just use a blockchain transaction to do that. But there's other types that could happen, right? It's not hard to imagine your diploma being issued on chain and validated that way. Like, for example, if you go to LinkedIn, you can look and see where I went to college. Let me put it another way. You can look and see where I say I went to college, right? But how do I prove it? If I really wanted to prove I went to college there, I'd have to either pull up a copy of the diploma, which that can be forged, or you could call the university and ask them, to validate, did this person says he went to school here, did he? So, for the most of the time, that doesn't really mean very much, right? But for certain types of certifications, that could be very important, right? You can imagine in real estate being a real estate agent in good standing. You have to follow the rules and pass the test to be an agent in a state, and having that on chain would be great. I mentioned college. I mean, if you want to get into deeper types of certifications, if you want to be a certain type of nurse, right? There's the basic registered nurse, but then there's cardiac nurses and things like that. That could all be on chain, so that when you're moving jobs, if you're a traveling nurse and you want to prove to them, yes, I am qualified to do this type of care, well, here it is. It's not just me saying it. It's not me just handing you a piece of paper that says it, but it's on chain where anyone can see it. So what California is doing here, this is really important. It's the kind of boring thing that doesn't get anyone excited, but it's critical if we're going to move stuff on chain going forward. Now, this is conceptual right here, but this is where I think it's really headed, is what I call object sovereignty. And this is from a company called Chainlink. They do what's called a dynamic NFT. And the idea is that you'll have on chain not just a person's credentials, but a property's credentials, right? So they have an example of a house, and they're showing two different periods. They're showing it in 2022 and then again in 2037. So in 2022, let's say it was built in 2021. That means it's 1 year old. You can have a record of when it was sold and for how much. Of course, the address is there, and then any maintenance history. And now if you fast forward 15 years, some things might have happened in the meantime, right? You may have been bought and sold a few times, so you'd want a chain of purchases. And you might want history on it. Maybe you added on to it. You added a new wing to it, or you replaced the roof and everything. Now, a lot of that data is available now, but it's hard to get at. Companies like Zillow can provide some of this data, mainly just transaction history. But the way they do it, it's really hard. I mean, they have agents all over the country that work with local offices to get this data into their database. And, emphasis on their database, right? They get to decide what is disclosed about this house in a way that's easy to see. So it's not hard to imagine if we move this stuff on chain, as opposed to allowing some centralized database somewhere, that gets really powerful, right? So it doesn't just show you about this particular property, but you could do a query. If you're a roofing contractor, you could do a query. If I want to see all the houses in this zip code that have not had their roofs replaced in the last 20 years, right? That would be really useful information if you're a roofing contractor. Okay, so I've painted a picture of what's possible in some of the technologies. Let's talk about the reality. So the reality is there's a lot of skepticism about this stuff. And I'm going to show you a website that I love, even though this is from a woman named Molly White. She created this website called Web3 is Going Just Great. She's pretty anti Web3, right? So she is not a fan. She is not a cheerleader. What she does, though, is she documents all the crazy scams, all the weird hacks, all the things that have really tarnished Web3 over the last several years. And some of them are just atrocious, hundreds of millions of dollars being stolen, or either because of a hacker or because someone claimed they were they claimed they were someone, but they weren't that someone, or because, like in this example, Celsius, which is an exchange, they sort of represented one thing to the public, but behind the scenes they were doing something else. And what these really show, like I bring this up because I feel like everyone should be informed, right? You should know what you're getting into when you're looking at this. And it's actually kind of great to have a single site where you can go look these things up and see the history of these different types of assets and these technologies. But it also, if you look at the long scope of history, right? So everything she documents here is all that's happened just in the last couple of years, right? If you take the banking system and go back to the late 1600s when, I forget his name, John, he was Scottish, the guy who basically established the central bank of France, rescued France from financial ruin. And, but along the way created the concept of a stock scam. There's all these things that have happened with banks over the years that are just atrocious. People's lives being ruined, just people jumping out of buildings because they're financially destroyed, and what's happened is every step of the way, a new regulatory agency is created, or a new law is written, or someone goes to jail to set an example. And that's what allows us to develop more confidence in the banking system over time. That said, it's still not perfect, right? There's still scams that happen all the time. But that's where a lot of our confidence in the banking system comes from, is from all these previous catastrophes, really, that have happened, and regulators and lawmakers have stepped in there to do it. Well, Web3 is not immune, right? We have our own financial panics that we're going through. We have our own Great Depressions that we go through. We have our own scams that we're going through. So it's not a surprise that these things are happening. The good news is that we are building to be more resilient to prevent these kinds of things from happening in the future. So instead of taking 200 or 300 years like it took with banking to get to a reasonably trustworthy place, we're going to do this in 3 to 5 years or 5 to 10 years. And so, a lot of ugly stuff is happening, but I'm still long-term very bullish on this. Like I said, I wouldn't be here teaching this course if I didn't really believe in the technology. I just do this because I really hate to blow smoke up people's ass, right? I want to be the opposite of that weird guy you may have seen on Twitter with the laser eyes, or with the weird like ape avatar who's just telling you how great crypto is. There's some really good things about crypto, but there's some things that aren't so good about it. And, we should be building with an eye toward improving the ecosystem as opposed to just trying to make out like a bandit while we can. So we're coming near the end here. Let me just advance the slide here. Just some more evidence. NFTs you may have heard about. They're down 99%. Not a surprise. I mean, when I saw these Bored Apes things selling, I was shocked too. Just like anyone else, I still believe most NFTs. I'll talk more about NFTs next week, but I still think the vast majority of them are garbage. When people ask me about them, I tell them to stay away. There's some utility value in NFTs, but most of what's making headlines is not worth. I was going to say the paper they're printed on, but they're not printed on paper. They're just these little pixelated images. So not a surprise that all these expensive NFTs are down 99%. This is something you may have heard about this week. Kim Kardashian just paid a big fine to the SEC for basically, she basically was just lying. She was touting a cryptocurrency and wasn't disclosing that she was getting paid. She got paid, I think, $250,000 to tout some cryptocurrency without disclosing it. And then she had to pay a fine of basically 5 times what she made on it. This is good. Bad actors should be punished. I actually kind of commend her for just owning up to it and not trying to lie her way out of it and double down and just tie it up in the courts. You know, she knew they caught her red-handed. She's paying the fine, and I'm hoping that this will set an example. Someone I was listening to the other day said one of the most important financial regulations was not regulations. It was seeing Ivan Boesky and Michael Milken hauled off in handcuffs. Wall Street cleaned up its act quite a bit after things like that happened. I'm hoping that things like this will continue to bring some, create some come to Jesus moments for people. Here's one I just saw just now, right? This is, literally just a couple hours ago on Twitter. This is an Algorand account I follow. Someone saying, hey, it looks like, whoever owns this wallet address, this is, there's some funds that have been stolen from it. We're trying to track them down and let them know. So it's kind of comical, really, just to watch. This is going to continue. Like I said, we're speed running the history of banking. We are at the period right now, back in the 60s, it used to be really easy to kite checks, right? That movie Catch Me If You Can was a guy who used to just write fake checks and cash them. Well, that's kind of the period we're at right now with crypto, is where it's really easy. I wouldn't say it's super easy, but it's easier than it should be to steal money out of people's wallets. That said, there are some green shoots, and this is what I'm betting on for the next wave of crypto revolution. This is the Lofty Marketplace I showed you earlier. I'll talk about them more in a couple weeks, but I do think that they are onto something. They've done more than 100 properties. I think they've got a really sustainable model that they've done about 100 properties. No reason that can't be 100,000 properties within a couple of years, and then millions of properties in the future. So this is a good sign to see that people have figured out a model that works for crypto. This is kind of a neat one. This is Cabin DAO. This is cool because these people are it's a DAO, which I'll explain what a DAO is in more detail next week. But it's just a group of people that went down and built a little house down in Texas. And if you go to their website, you can join the DAO and you get rewarded tokens for doing work. So if you want to go down to, they're about 45 minutes outside of Austin, and help them build this little bathhouse, then you can earn tokens. And this is a great example of what crypto enables. This is the kind of thing that would have been a lot harder to do pre-cryptocurrency, because it's harder to allocate ownership and track work done without tokens of some sort. I guess you could technically do it with poker chips or something like that, but it's a lot easier because of these new technologies. And then a couple other things I just wanted to point out. This is the Real World Assets Consortium. I am one of the members. REI DAO is one of the members. There's several companies that are involved. We are serious about this. We don't see any reason why within 20 years, pretty much every real estate asset should be on chain. And if it's not on chain, you should be wondering why it's not on chain, right? That should be almost like a red flag. And so we work together to develop standards. I would love it if you're interested in joining, to come check us out, rwaconsortium.com. It's free to join for now, although that's going to change. We're going to start having an annual membership, but it's still very reasonably priced, and it's a good place if you're into getting into the weeds and the bits and bytes of how blockchain and real estate should work. This is your place, and we meet every week to talk about some neat concepts. And that's going to be it for today. So next week is week 2. This is where we're going to get into NFTs, tokens, protocols, and DAOs. Really explain in detail what each of these is and what you should care about. Right? As I mentioned, most NFTs are garbage. You shouldn't care about most NFTs, but there's a handful that you should care about. So we're going to explain that. Same with tokens and protocols and DAOs, just so that you have a better lay of the land and understand, really why you should care about this Web3 real estate stuff, and, speak to it intelligently so that you don't feel like people are just blowing buzzwords at you. With that, I am going to wrap it up. As I mentioned, we will be posting this in video and as a podcast in our system. and in our online course. So I appreciate you all for coming. You can post questions in the reiDAO.community if you have any questions about anything we talked about, any suggestions for how this was done. Like I said, this is my first time using this new type of this video system, and so it's been a learning experience for me. So with that, I am going to sign off, and thank you all for coming. Now, I got to figure out how to sign off. Bye-bye.